Now that there's no difference between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, according to the CDC, how can you justify anyone ever having lost their jobs over this at all? It is pure nonsense, and I'm not letting it go. And I know Buck's not letting it go, but some of your politicians out there, sometimes they need reminding about what the big issues are. And if you're forgetting, they put crime scene tape around our playgrounds and said that was normal. And they're trying to get away with no punishment whatsoever for violating the number one rule that every politician has to survive, and that is this: are you decent at making decisions? I saw Anthony Fauci give an interview in Seattle, I believe it was, where he said that they're calling it the Fauci effect. All these kids are going to med school now because of Dr. Fauci and what he represents. And I was watching that and I was thinking to myself, I wish I could quiz every doctor that I have for the rest of my life and say, do you think Dr. Fauci did a good job? And if the answer is yes, I don't want that doctor because you're not smart enough to handle any issues that I have, right? Thankfully, I haven't had to go to the doctor in a long time. But when I have to go to the doctor again, if I just say, hey, do you think Fauci did a good job? And the response is, I think he did a phenomenal job. I think we should be wearing 8 masks. I think that Dr. Fauci is the greatest medical practitioner, advisor in the history of our nation. I don't ever want to be receiving medical advice from that doctor ever. I would be like, all right, I want to walk her right out. So the CDC, for 2.5 years, has just been making up things as they went along. And then yesterday, they just decide, hey, we're going to put out some new guidance. Now, I understand a lot of you out there are like me, and you're like Buck, and you have long since sworn off paying attention to CDC guidance. But it is kind of amazing what the CDC said in this newest updated guidance. Here is some bullet points of what they said in their new guidance. Those exposed to the virus are no longer required to quarantine. Hold on. You told me if I was exposed to the virus, I was supposed to go sit in my house for 2 weeks. Now you're saying, hey, you know what? Quarantines aren't necessary. This is the key. Unvaccinated people now have the same guidance as vaccinated people. This is crazy. For the last 1.5 years, you've been telling me if I didn't get the COVID shot, I was going to die, and that we were going to have a winter of death, and that this was only a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And now the CDC, in their own guidance, has come out and said unvaccinated people have the same guidance as vaccinated people. Remember kids in schools? They can stay in class after being exposed to the virus. Remember when you were called anti-science if you said, I don't know that my kids need to go home for 2 weeks if somebody who sits at the same lunch table as them got COVID? I don't know if in the classroom somebody who sits at another desk got COVID, that my kids need to, sitting close to that boy or girl, have to leave. They got lectured. How dare you be so anti-science? Well, now there's no moving kids out when they get exposed to the virus. And it's kind of a big deal. Remember when you used to say, hey, why are we testing people without symptoms? People be like, you don't care about my grandma, bro. You don't care if my grandma dies. That's on you. Now it's no longer recommended to screen those without symptoms. So remember when they got mad at Trump for saying, I think we're testing too much. You know, if you feel fine, why are you getting tested? Everything that we have said on this program and that Buck and I have said publicly for over 2 years now, the CDC has finally agreed with. Remember when they were saying, the Great Barrington Declaration? Remember all those brave scientists and doctors who were actually willing to swim against the tide of mass opinion and say that much of what the CDC was recommending was nonsense? I mean, remember, Don't forget, the CDC said you couldn't go within 6 feet of someone else. That was totally made up. They put tape on the floors and told you you could only walk down one side of a grocery store. They made circles in parks and told you you had to stand inside of them outdoors. They arrested a man on a paddleboard out in the open ocean. They filled in outdoor skate parks so kids wouldn't skateboard. They took the rims off of basketball goals so kids wouldn't play basketball. They took crime scene tape and they put it around playgrounds so your kids wouldn't swing on the swing set outdoors. They did that everywhere. They did it in my neighborhood. I live in the Nashville area, Williamson County, Tennessee. It's like the heartbeat of the Republican Party. In my neighborhood, yellow crime scene tape, like we had just had a mass murder on the playground. They might as well have just chalked out some dead bodies inside to let us know how the danger was going. My kids couldn't get on the jungle gym. That's what they did to us. And now the CDC is just saying, our bad, all that was wrong. Joe Biden, if the Supreme Court hadn't stood up to him, was going to mandate that anybody who was an employee in the entire nation had to get a COVID shot that didn't work. And tons of people, I'm not even sure we know the total number, lost their jobs because they looked at all the data and said, I already had COVID. I don't think this COVID shot makes sense. Or I'm young and healthy. I just ran 8 miles today in the military. I think I can handle a sniffle. I don't think it makes sense for me to get COVID shots. They fired all these people. Republicans in the House and the Senate and your staffs who are listening right now, don't let anyone forget about this. You need to be running in the midterms on the promise that the first vote you will have when you get back in the House and in the Senate is to demand that everyone who lost their job over the COVID shot gets that job back with back pay. And the second vote you should have is to rescind the 87,000 IRS agents that Joe Biden's party just added to the federal bureaucracy. But the first one needs to be, now that there's no difference between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, according to the CDC, how can you justify anyone ever having lost their jobs over this at all? It is pure nonsense, and I'm not letting it go. And I know Buck's not letting it go, but some of your politicians out there, sometimes they need reminding about what the big issues are. And if you're forgetting, they put crime scene tape around our playgrounds and said that was normal. And they're trying to get away with no punishment whatsoever for violating the number one rule that every politician has to survive, and that is this: are you decent at making decisions? Every single Democrat in this country, every mayor, every governor, every senator, they had the same data that we all saw, and they failed the most important choice of this generation when it came to COVID. And now the CDC is just saying, yeah, you guys were right.